don't just have the voice. If you're connected or elected, you have a voice.
So the key issue with Musk's actions is that it's happening in this zone that we could best describe as a gray legal zone, or perhaps more accurately described as a zone of illegality. So he is effectively shutting down an American government agency. That requires an act of Congress. He is effectively firing or putting on administrative leave huge proportions of the federal workforce. Again, even the president doesn't have the power to do this. This is really something that requires congressional permission.
Elon can't do and won't do anything without our approval, and we'll give him the approval where appropriate. Where not appropriate, we won't. But he does have a good natural instinct. He's got a team of very talented people. We're trying to shrink government, and he can probably shrink it as well as anybody else, if not better.
And shutting off payments to third parties like grantees, and this could include universities, nonprofits, or foreign aid providers, also is not something we think that the president is allowed to do. There's something called the Impoundment Control Act that prevents the president from deciding he will not spend congressional funds. So Musk taking over payment systems or USAID and saying we're not going to pay the obligations of this government agency is a huge red flag. The president can certainly set new directions for federal employees, and he can use political appointees to issue guidance to those employees. But there's a vast difference between that and simply firing all of the employees, which is something that he's not legally allowed to do. I think I would still predict that the court would say that the president cannot impound funds, that is, he can just ignore Congress when it comes to spending. There is case law on this, and there is clear statutory intent from Congress. I think the president will probably gain more power over civil service employees than he has currently, but I don't think they will dismantle the entire civil service system or give the president the power to simply fire all employees through backdoor means.
And so that's where I guess I'm deeply concerned about the precedent being set here, that this is, in my view, an egregious executive branch overreach. I don't believe they have this authority, at least not without the consent of Congress. And I have no problem with DOGE trying to find ways to save money. They should do that. USAID is an agency that was both authorized and funded by the United States Congress, and it would take an act of the Congress to shut it down. It's that simple. And so neither the president nor does Elon Musk have the authority to shut them down. But in the meantime, they're causing enormous amounts of damage because people are being called home. There are people who are trying to figure out how to get home, and there's been an enormous disruption. And in the case of USAID, gaps have been there are massive gaps and holes in the countries where we're serving now. I suspect the Chinese are salivating because they'll be more than happy to fill power vacuums, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and wherever else we are going to abandon the field. That is, when the Congress passes a spending law, the president simply can't take out his what we call the blue pencil and then excise or eliminate spending he does not like. Does not have that authority. Many governors in many states do, but the president of the United States does not, and the Supreme Court has ruled on that. So at some point, I suspect there is going to be some kind of a constitutional crisis At the very least, there'll be a challenge because the Supreme Court will have to rule: can the president eliminate programs without any input or guidance from Congress? And I suspect the answer to that question is going to be no. And certainly Elon Musk doesn't have the authority to do it. So it just feels like the whole federal enterprise is in disarray right now, and we don't know how this is going to end. But look, March 14th is coming. The government needs to be funded, and in practical terms, Republicans are going to need a whole lot of Democratic votes in the House and the Senate to fund the government, and I suspect those Democratic votes are not going to come easily or cheap. They're going to insist that monies that have been appropriated be spent for the purposes for which they were intended. They're going to make all sorts of demands about, for example, that buyout. I think Congress can easily reclaim some of that authority. They need to protect their institutional interests right now. The role of the Congress is not simply to serve as a rubber stamp to the president. I mean, I've always said, we have a system of separation of powers, but it feels like it's a system of separation of parties. That the party, the president and Congress feels it's their obligation to protect their president. And I say the same thing about Democrats. They too, they did the same thing. And so, but at some point, members in both political parties need to stand up for their institution. There's. And I don't see that happening today, and I hope it does over the coming weeks and months.
Lesser extent, nations like Iran. A lot of these programs are still operating based on how they were set up 60 years ago, and there are many instances of projects that have been funded that are of questionable value. Again, especially this was exacerbated under the Biden administration. So, to me, this is a reasonable place to start, even if they aren't going to end up balancing the budget exclusively by looking at foreign aid.
Force of the world. We are
all the way, and we will be together all the way. Thank you.